Hello and welcome. I'm Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo Story. Our focus on the crisis in Afghanistan continues on a day when the country would have otherwise commemorated its Independence Day. The big question that the world is asking is the new Taliban just like the old Taliban? That will be the focus of our conversation today on the special broadcast. Let's bring up our big story today. It is Afghanistan's Independence Day, and the country has seen protests, including by women, street protests in several provincial capitals of the country. This time, there is some civilian resistance, but we'll get a sense from the ground on exactly how serious and big that resistance is. Meanwhile, the former President Ashraf Ghani is defending his decision to leave the country, saying he would have been killed otherwise, denying reports that he left the country with millions stashed away. The chaos at the airport in Kabul continues. Viral videos are revealing stampede scenes as well as shooting by the Taliban. The White House is accusing the Taliban of constricting the access of civilians to the airport. Women, meanwhile, are appearing on news television, but at least on a government broadcast station, are being replaced by men. The place of women in Afghan society is now going to be critical as the Taliban talks about Sharia law. So the question we're asking today is the new Taliban just like the old Taliban, and where does that leave options for the world, in particular for countries like ours as South Asia looks at possible destabilization? That is our deep dive on the program today, and let's bring up a very, very interesting and diverse set of speakers today. Let's introduce them one by one. We're joined on the program by Kanika Gupta. She's an independent journalist who has just returned from Afghanistan, was among the Indians evacuated by the Air Force. Welcome, Kanika, and welcome home. We're also joined by General Ata Hasnain, an army veteran who's also been General Officer Commanding of the 15th Corps in Jammu and Kashmir. Also joining us from Kabul live is Ayesha Tanzeem. Ayesha is with the Voice of America and has been reporting on the ground for several days. We'll get a first-hand sense from her of what's happening on the ground. Ambassador KC Singh, veteran diplomat, is with us as well. And also joining us is Major General Meston. Major General Meston has been the defense attaché in the Indian embassy in Kabul and also has a good on-ground understanding of how the Taliban operates and thinks. I would like to start with you, Ayesha. You're on the ground in Kabul. None of us are as we speak. And there's a lot of kind of debate over whether this Taliban is just like the old Taliban. And there are very, very conflicting reports coming from the ground. There are videos, but you can't actually ascertain sometimes the authenticity, sometimes the timeline. Give us a sense of what you're seeing on the ground, in particular, how the Taliban is behaving with civilians, with women, with journalists. Go ahead, Ayesha.
Barkha, thank you. I think it's too early to tell whether this Taliban is the same as the old Taliban or not. There are two reasons. First of all, they've given some statements, official statements that, that sound very good. They've promised, not to violate human rights, not to violate women's rights, to allow freedom of press, etc. And right now, they haven't solidified. I mean, they've ran over the country. They're all over Kabul in every street. But they haven't really taken over the government. Their negotiations are still ongoing. I mean, their senior leaders, some of their leaders are in Kabul. Anas Haqqani, the son of Sirajuddin Haqqani, yesterday met with Dr. Abdullah, Hamid Karzai, Gulbuddin Hikmatyar. So the thing is that until now, we see mostly the Talibs on the ground or the fighters on the ground sticking to what the senior leadership promises, but then we also see pockets of where they're not sticking to it, especially out in the provinces. So I talked to the head of a major private television channel in Afghanistan today, and he said that his reporters, and the other reason why I think it's too early to tell is that women, journalists, activists, everybody have imposed sanctions the wrong word, restrictions on themselves. So we don't know what Taliban will do when they come face to face, for example, with a modern woman who's not dressed as they'd like her to dress. Because right now, a lot of women have automatically started wearing abayas and covering their entire head, which is usually not the dress for Kabul. A lot of men have stopped wearing t-shirts and jeans. They're wearing shalwar kameez. A lot of activists I've talked to are staying home, hunkering down. They don't want to take a risk. And so what's happening is that we're waiting and watching as these people slowly take steps to get back to where they used to be. So the head of this television channel told me that his female reporters are out with the cameramen, they're working. And he said that we have given them a choice. They can wear whatever they want to and whatever they choose. If they want to cover themselves up, it's up to them. If they want to continue wearing what they used to wear before, that is also up to them. So women are out there working. But they have changed. A lot of them have changed their attire. I mean, Kabul does not look like it did, before the Taliban takeover. So
I take your point that a lot of it is in anticipation of what the Taliban has known to have been in the past, and there is a sort of well-documented record of the infringement of women's liberties in particular. Another question I have for you, Ayesha, before we open this up for a larger conversation, is what's happening at the airport. We've seen two statements come out of the State Department and the White House, one confirming that American weapons have fallen into Taliban hands, and the other has the Americans accusing the Taliban of constricting easy access to the airport where desperate Afghans are looking to leave the country. And the Americans say this is in violation of the understanding in Doha of the agreement. Can you give us a sense of what's happening at the airport? Because we continue to see extremely disturbing videos, some of which are not fit for broadcast, but we did have the journalist Marcus Yam a couple of days ago tweeting out extremely bloody scenes, bodies, corpses lying at the airport. Go ahead, Ayesha.
So I have been around, I'm inside the airport now, I've been around the airport multiple times. So what I have seen is, because as soon as the news came that Taliban were close to the city or at the gates of the city, everybody wanted to rush out. There was panic and thousands of people gathered outside the airport. And you have also probably reported on the scenes of when they ran over the tarmac and civilian planes had to be suspended. So even now, there are thousands of people around the airport trying to get in. I hear constant gunfire. Like yesterday, the entire day, I could hear gunfire. A lot of this gunfire is crowd control. Sometimes done, the first two times I went around the airport, the Taliban were doing two things. One, they were keeping the people away from the airport. From the looks of it, it seemed like crowd control, where they were beating people back with batons, and sometimes they would fire in the air. And then now we know that some of it is and that is not easy access to the airport. So you're absolutely right that they are blocking people's access to the airport. But the thing is, even if you get to the airport, getting inside is not easy. I mean, all gates are blocked because civilians are just surrounding the airport in panic, desperately trying to get inside. And you get to any gate, it's mayhem. It's just a large crowd. I mean, even when I came in through the gate that I came in, even though it was restricted to only foreigners and only people that were being evacuated by the US and Europeans, Canadians, etc., I had to be in a crowd pushing and shoving, children wailing, women wailing in panic, men crying for 2 hours, getting everybody on top of each other before we could finally get in. So the scenes outside the airport are not good. The scenes inside the airport are not good. People's families have been separated. The parents are inside, the children are outside, the brothers inside, the sisters outside. So yes, the scenes are not good. A lot of it is panic. And lots of people just trying to get inside, many with no documents, just hoping to get on a plane.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, you've really brought alive the situation on the ground, and please do stay safe while you report. General Hasnain, we have a statement from the Indian Foreign Minister of the United Nations saying India will take its cue from the Afghan people. But as Ayesha Tanzeem very vividly describes, I don't think the people also yet fully know what is coming their way. And there's certainly, while there are protests against the Taliban, there aren't too many tears being shed for the fleeing Ashraf Ghani, despite his sort of rationalization for his behavior. But at the same time, you do have Hamid Karzai, Dr. Abdullah meeting with all of these Taliban representatives, leaving a very, very confusing situation for the world and indeed for us in India to wrap our heads around. General Hasnain.
See, Barkha, what happened at Doha all these months is not entirely transparent. Besides that, other back channels, what kinds of talks have taken place, nothing has been very transparent in these dealings. So what was the final agreement which came about, if there was an agreement at all? That too is unclear. So this is a very tenuous situation in which, for example, the Vice President, Amrullah Saleh, has taken off and gone into the Panjshir Valley. You're looking at the potential of building up of resistance in the Panjshir Valley, the revival of the nine-party alliance and things like that. That's another story on the other side. And here you have Hamid Karzai as one of the interlocutors virtually. So I think this situation politically, diplomatically is highly confused. We are only actually on the 4th or the 5th day ever since the whole issue broke out. And I do think that things are all under observation. There are different narratives being played out with different situations being played out differently. But there is nothing clear at the moment except what Ayesha is telling us about the situation on ground, which has been observed by her. None of us are really observing this on ground. I do think a lot of disinformation from the Pakistani side is also built into this. Information warfare of this kind is all being played out by Pakistan. You know, these various funny, awkward scenes which you are seeing of the Taliban eating ice cream and playing with all kinds of merry-go-rounds and things like that. This seems so immature, and who's doing all this, one doesn't really realize. Somewhere it seems there are too many players not knowing what narrative to actually play out. I think there will be some clarity in the next 6-7 days as you find an element of leadership of the Taliban emerging, which is becoming quite evident that it will emerge in the next few days. And hopefully from then onward, something will happen. Some order will probably be restored at the airport. So far, the confusion at the airport is also partially because there are American troops around, I guess, Ayesha. There are American troops there for the sake of security. And you can't afford to have a major clash between the American troops and the Taliban on the ground, but then there is going to be a mishmash and a very, very turbulent situation which will run completely out of control.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I just want Ayesha to come in briefly, on the mood that you're picking up on the streets. I think you spoke about the self-censorship in terms of dress codes and so on. But, in terms of the fact that you have an Amrullah Saleh saying that he's now, the president, because there is no president. You have Karzai, who's now actively negotiating. Is there some sense of support for these moves on the ground, or are people too terrified for there to be a clear, definable sense? Of course, like all countries, Afghanistan is a complex country. There is no monolithic voice of the people. I understand that. But even given that, if you had to sort of say, what are you picking up when you see these protesters, when you see people who are coming out? Is it fear, or is the fear gradually shifting to anger and some sort of support for alternative political voices?
I think right now it's still fear. It's too early. People are hoping that whatever negotiation Dr. Abdullah is having with Taliban succeeds and it results in some form of government. Nobody is expecting the Taliban to, allow them to have like the full freedoms that they had before. Even before the Taliban takeover, when I talked to the Afghan intelligentsia, they were discussing and speculating on an Afghan-style shura and elections under a shura. Nobody was under the illusion that the Taliban would form a political party and join them in politics. But the fact is that people are afraid. And they're afraid that if this fails, then that means a Taliban takeover militarily, announcing an Islamic emirate and a return to the 90s. They're hoping that, that the fact that the Taliban are talking to these leaders means that they do want international recognition, and maybe the international community has some leverage there. These are all hopes. Right now, people are afraid. I mean, the feeling that I pick up from them, and they've said it, some of them have said it to me when I ask them, do you believe the Taliban promises? And several of them have said, no, the Taliban are too busy elsewhere right now. When they settle in, when they solidify their hold on power, then things will change, and then they will come for us, and then they will impose, their harsh laws. So right now, it's too early to tell. A lot of anxiety, a lot of panic. Especially in the progressive, educated progressive class in Afghanistan. And they're watching with bated breath what happens between Taliban and people like Dr. Abdullah Karzai and Hikmatyar, the three people who formed this council, which is supposedly running the country, till the transition, although Taliban are now in control of everything. So, I mean, if whatever is going on behind the scenes fails, that is when you will see the next rush, the next panicked exit from Afghanistan. Right now, people are trying to leave, but a lot of them don't have visas and passports, or, their kids don't have visas, etc. But if this fails, you will then see worse scenes at the airport and whatever border crossing you can find.
So that's interesting. We don't yet know if this government that is going to lead Afghanistan is going to be a government that has voices other than the Taliban, and much will depend on how these negotiations go, being led by Dr. Abdullah and Hamid Karzai. Ambassador KC Singh, you are on not the best of lines, and nor is Kanika. So let me just, while we have you, get you to come in. Is this a new Taliban? Is it the old one? We have Ayesha on the ground saying we simply don't know. In the absence of knowing, there are countries with direct sort of support for Taliban, who have hosted the Taliban, China among them. There are countries like ours in India who are being much more cautious. What is your reading?
Look, very clearly they're waiting, they're seeking legitimacy, and that's why they're probably not showing their true colors yet, if there are any true colors. There are 2 or 3 pressure points on them. The Reserve Bank head of Afghanistan, who's escaped, he has said that $9 billion, and much of those.
All right. I don't think Ambassador KC Singh can remain on a stable line. So, General Meston, I'd like to get you on the point that he was about to make about the frozen assets of the Taliban, and how that is going to influence the outcome of what is going to happen. General Meston, go ahead.
Barkha, thank you. Good evening for inviting me. It's a pleasure to reconnect. Firstly, on the frozen assets, I think that is a very, very appropriate action taken at the correct time, because that is how Taliban will come under any kind of pressure. And they know that the economy of this country or the future of this country depends on the money. And I was told huge $1 billion have been freezed. And therefore, even the funding of the Afghan National Army and the government of Afghanistan from United States will cease. So this is really going to affect, and maybe that perhaps the formation of the government would be little difficult. Now, certain points, Barkha, if you don't mind, I would like to add on to what Ayesha and General Hasnain have covered up extremely well. Certain on-ground situation is also that firstly, there's an organization known as Women's for Justice for Afghanistan Women, which is an organization having 35 people there. Now, the day the Taliban came, the same night they have gone and raided their office and destroyed all the girls, and there are 2-3 boys, they have gone into hiding. In fact, they are in a terrible condition. Now, they are also doing targeted killings in the night of officers who have been in the special forces and also in the National Directorate of Security, because they are the erstwhile KGB trained organization, which has been very effective. So they are basically targeting senior officers, and since I have a close dealing with Afghan National Army people and I maintain contacts with most of them till date, I have spoken to a large number of them. They are actually into hiding, and since last 4 or 5 days they are just hiding with weapons, and they are cut off from their families, and Taliban is going into the night in the houses asking where are the your husbands and so forth, brothers or sons, etc. So they are doing this, And I have just been
and
informed that
this is after the Taliban said in its initial remarks that there would be amnesty for all and there would be no reprisal. You are arguing, General Meston, that your information from the ground is that claim is not being upheld.
no, absolutely true. In fact, in Kandahar only, I think about 4 people have been just killed, senior people who were of the NDS and commando. So what Taliban is saying and what is happening on ground, there is a total disparity. Nothing is happening the way they are speaking. All of us are seeing on various channels and everything, and even my ground reports are telling me, and they're fooling the people. So nothing is happening the way. And yesterday itself in Jalalabad, you are aware, the uprisings were there. This is for a reason that they hosted their flag, and there was a
Yeah.
journalist. I'm just forgetting his name. He was working in an organization. He was the editor in chief. He had the guts to climb up back and host, and that is how the host back the Afghan flag, and he was killed. And thereafter there was uprisings. Similarly in Post, Kular, and even Bamyan, where they have destroyed the statue of the father of Hazaras, and Hazaras by nature are fairly docile. So, despite the Taliban blocking the exit routes from Kabul to other places, people are now moving on the quiet towards Panjshir Valley, and there is a rallying point. Inputs also say that Dostum is likely to, link up by tomorrow. So this is another thing, and you may be also aware that Tajikistan embassy,
Yes.
which is there, they had removed the photograph of Ashraf Ghani, and they have now put back the photo of Amrullah Saleh. So what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say is that there is a government in place. Actually, this government is not off because technically and legally, Ashraf Ghani has just left. He is not resigned. So
Yeah, but he
rightfully
fled the
say
country
Amrullah
and thereby
Saleh.
losing
Yeah,
authority and credibility for sure.
yeah,
But I
absolutely.
take your point. You're making 2 points. One, that the claims made verbally are not matching what you're hearing on the ground. There is targeted reprisal taking place. And second, that there is some, in your opinion, General Meston, some sort of military resistance building up. Could it be a la the Northern Alliance of 20 years ago? We don't know. We do know Ahmad Shah Massoud's son, Ahmad Massoud, has written in the Washington Post that he is going to fight. What can these fights amount to? I'd be interested in hearing Ayesha's sense. But Kanika, I know before you came back, you had a sense to travel around. In particular, I'd like to hear what women and girls are saying to you, because there is nobody else whose lives are going to be as impacted as women and girls. Go ahead, Kanika.
Thank you, Barkha. I personally have spoken to a lot of women because that's one of the things that I have mostly wanted to know about. With or without the Taliban, I have always been very curious to know as to how the lives of women have been affected over the years and how it's going to be going forward. So I was in Kandahar for one of my stories when I stayed with a local family, and there were a bunch of women who were always covered in that, chadri, and and it was very difficult to wear that piece of fabric, especially given the temperatures and the humidity. The weather was really merciless there in Kandahar at the time. And I asked them, why do you wear the chadri? And their eyes bulged out in shock, and they were like, if we don't wear it, Taliban is going to pour acid on my head. So this is the kind of fear that women have in their hearts, even when Taliban had not officially come in Kandahar at that time. Now, coming back to Kabul, when the day Taliban came into the city, I was with some women. I was taking some interviews, and there was a security briefing at a government office when the news came to them that that the Taliban have entered the city limits, and all hell broke loose then and there. I mean, women were running all over the place, and they were scared. They started crying, and they said, we don't want to go back into hiding. We don't want to go back into living under the shadows of men. We want to continue working for the government, continue working for the society like we have worked for 20 years. And then there was a lot of crying and a lot of panic. So I think women have this trust deficit, that even when Taliban has been repeatedly saying that we will give you your freedom, we will give you your choices, you will be able to do what you want to do, there is this trust deficit that no, we don't think it's going to be like that. So they have now gone
Yeah.
into hiding.
Okay, thank you for that. Before I come to Ayesha, General Hasnain, in this confusion, General Meston still believes that a resistance could build up. It is not an inevitability as most of the world now believes that this is the return of the Taliban, that this will be a Taliban-led government. Do you share that assessment, or do you think that irrespective of what shape and form this government takes, it will be dominated by the Taliban, and the world, all of us, will have to figure out a way of how to react to that new normal?
See, Barkha, there are a couple of questions in what you ask. The first is that I completely endorse what John Meston says. John Meston and I are very old friends. We have a good understanding of each other's ideas. And I can assure you what he says about the Panjshir Valley is completely endorsed by me. Because I do think the basic sense of resistance which an Afghan possesses will probably come to the fore. It's a question of getting the organization correct. It shouldn't be like the way that the Americans have gone about trying to raise an Afghan national army on the basis of Western organizations and trying to train them for conventional warfare. But here, if this whole scenario is seen to be something of a typical insurgency pattern, a guerrilla pattern, led unconventionally, I don't see any reason why this can't gravitate into becoming something very serious in terms of resistance, provided you have the external support available. In the case of India, we unfortunately don't enjoy a common border. Otherwise, this could have been a very different game. We have to do whatever through Tajikistan, Iran, or whichever the other direction it has to be done. Having said that, the Taliban, I do feel in the next few days, will get their act together. Under a lot of resistance, there will be a lot of pressure on them politically, internationally. What General Meston said, the aspect of funding, this is going to be the crucial thing. And this will somehow bring them together ultimately to agree to certain basic necessities and issues with the Americans. They have to allow the nation to function. They have to govern the nation. The question is, how much of a role will the Chinese and the Russians play in this? Because the Russian ambassador, as you're aware, was the first to make to trigger off immediately some kind of an outreach to the Taliban. We haven't heard thereafter. So it's a question of how much of a counter role will the Russians and the Chinese play to try and ensure that the American influence wanes from here. The Taliban, but in the interim, I do think the Taliban will remain in control with spurts of violence here and there, resistance which will build up over a period of time.
Okay, Ayesha, I do have to start taking last comments from all of you. So let me ask you this, Ayesha: is that flag, the Afghanistan flag today being part of the protest, is a very important symbol. That flag is not accepted by the Taliban, which has declared Afghanistan to be an Islamic emirate. Do you pick up any notion that the resistance could become real, or will it remain sort of geographical and defined by tribes as it was in the past?
Well, Barkha, to be very honest, as I keep repeating, it's too early. A lot will depend on what happens in the negotiations between Taliban and the Afghan political leaders. If those negotiations succeed in a way that the population sees is not an ideal Afghanistan for them, but at least a peaceful country where they have some rights. Like I said, I've been covering the country for 6 years now. And even last year, after it was clear that America was going to make a deal with them, I came here, the Afghan intelligentsia, very progressive people. I sat down with them and I said, what kind of a future are you guys thinking about? And I told you they were imagining an Iran-like Shura governing the country and elections under the Shura. So they were saying, we are not expecting the Taliban, of course, to give up all of their what they believe in, but we expect them to leave something for us too. So I think a lot depends on these negotiations. If they fail, then all of these other things, the resistance in Panjshir and the resistance on the ground, they will all build up. And I think a lot of this resistance will now come from outside. A lot of these people are going to leave the country. Those who haven't left yet are just waiting to find a way to get out. Some of them are just waiting for flights to normalize, airport to open. Others are waiting for the borders to open. So you will start seeing the resistance from the Afghan diaspora building up. And a lot of it depends on two things. One is the Taliban behavior, whether it's due to international pressure. I mean, there's a food crisis in Afghanistan. Half the population in the country is in dire humanitarian needs. So they need the United Nations. They need their reserves. So a lot will depend on the behavior of the Taliban, but also on the negotiations between the senior political leadership in Afghanistan and Taliban.
Kanika, one of the things that's quite clear is that the government is not when I say the government, I should say the erstwhile government is not necessarily popular. So while there is great, enormous fear when it comes to the Taliban, there is a sense of disgust almost with the way Ghani left, despite his defense today that he would have been killed had he not. In your travels across Afghanistan, even before the Taliban took over, I know that's when you were there, did you pick up that kind of disillusionment with the Ashraf Ghani government, Kanika?
Like with the government people, or do you mean with the government or with the people? Because the people who were working for the government were still very hopeful till the last day that they have a very brave front, and I was talking to a lot of officers, NDS, army people, and they all seem to be very, very confident up to the last minute that they have everything in order. In fact, one day before Kabul fell to Taliban, I was with officials of Ministry of Defense, and they were very, very sure that no, we are in safe hands. We have a system, we have a plan in place. So I was very surprised next day when all of it just basically was talk. So I think they had I don't know if they meant to sort of hide it from me, or they really didn't have the clue themselves, but people had faith in the government till the very last minute. And when Ghani officially stepped down as the president, I think people were just shell shocked. I mean, I remember one of the persons, he was one of this person that I met on the streets of Kabul. He said to me that no, he's been cheated. I know Ghani would not do that by his own volition. He has been cheated. He's been driven out of the country. So that's just one person, but I'm pretty sure that doesn't speak for the rest of the country. But largely, people were in favor of the government versus than being in the favor of Taliban.
Yeah, but those would say, some would say, of course, that those are binary choices that the Afghan people may not necessarily have wanted. And I think a lot changed when Ghani ran. General Meston, here's my question to you. Of course, there are reports he's denied them, that he ran away with cash, he ran away with millions. He says he left in his slippers. My question is this: the ground situation. I think we're not realizing the security implications. I think you were among those to point out that if it is indeed a Taliban-led government, what's going to happen to the thousands of men that the Taliban calls fighters, that the rest of the world calls terrorists? One. Second is the weaponry, the American weaponry from Humvees to missile systems that are now available to the Taliban. General Meston.
Yeah. Barkha, can I just add something on the revolt part of it? What is happening? The interesting part of it is, erstwhile we focused only on the Northern Alliance and the Panjshir Valley. But now with Nangarhar, that is Jalalabad area, Kunar area, and even the neighboring areas, that is bordering areas with Pakistan, the kind of a revolt has started. So what I'm trying to point out is that today many Pashtuns are against Taliban and they are against Pakistan. In fact, they would be very happy to take this and start hitting Pakistan. So this is a point which I just wanted to add on. So this thing perhaps may or may not take shape, depends. And I think help from some external agencies, maybe some countries, for example, Iran, even India, I think we can do it. And there are various methodologies to do that. Even Russia may perhaps join, not China. So yeah, so this is I wanted to continue that.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry, you were saying something.
No, I was just talking about these weapons and this surplus sort of army,
Yeah.
as it were, ragtag army of fighters.
Yeah.
I use the word in quotes. That's what the Taliban refers to themselves as. I do have to close, but General Hasnain, that creates a huge security implication. And with the Americans having basically washed their hands off, Biden doubling down on his decision, on his mishandling of this entire situation, I think Ayesha makes the point, and it's well taken. We simply do not know. We just do not know what's going to happen next. but we do know how world leaders will stack up, and we have some sense of that. But there's a sense that if these negotiations fail, the world is fatigued. General Meston thinks there might still be some backing for this resistance to the Taliban. Do you share that assessment, or do you think the world will say, let's just get on with it?
See, Barkha, what really worries me is this, what you just mentioned, the availability of weaponry. You see, the Americans have spent $88 billion on creating this organization, the ANA, which has melted away in 3 days. Now, the issue is not about Humvees and aircraft, etc. Those have fallen into the hands of the Taliban. It has strengthened the hands of the Taliban. It's okay. But 350,000 men require 350,000 small weapons, small arms. That means 350,000 and more small arms are now flourishing around all over Afghanistan. In whose hands, we don't know. This is exactly what happened in 1989, if you remember. And that's how the weaponry all reached Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir and places like that. Much of it went into Bosnia, Herzegovina, if you remember at that time. So we are now once again in a repeat cycle of that situation, because you know Afghanistan, the manner in which weapons are bought and sold there. There's no question of licensing and things like that. So this is something which we have to really live with for the next couple of years until some kind of a control can come on them. I would think that the Americans would make it conditional for any kind of UN support, etc., would make it conditional that the Taliban has to have some kind of an accountability for these weapons.
Yeah, I think these are all the questions that we simply do not know the answers to. There's so much we simply do not know at this point, and the world is watching literally with bated breath. We'll have to leave it there. General Hasnain, General Meston, to Kanika and to Ayesha, thank you for your reports from the ground and for letting us know what's happening. Ayesha, in particular to you, who's still in Kabul. Stay safe, and thank you to our audience. We will continue to keep a very, very close eye on the unraveling and unfolding situation in Kabul. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow. Goodbye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.